The morning sun cast long shadows across Camp Pendleton's training grounds as Staff Sergeant Maria Santos stepped out of the military transport vehicle. Her right leg moved with a slight but noticeable limp, each step deliberate and measured. The California heat was already building, promising another scorching day of recruit training. Maria adjusted her drill instructor's campaign cover and straightened her uniform. At 32, she had seen more combat than most soldiers twice her age. But today, she wasn't thinking about the past. Today was about the future, training the next generation of Marines who would carry on the Corps' legacy. The recruits were already assembled in formation, their fresh faces betraying a mixture of excitement and terror. 80 young men and women, barely out of high school, stood at attention in the blazing sun. They had volunteered to become Marines, but they had no idea what that truly meant. As Maria approached the formation, she could hear the whispers starting. It always happened this way. New recruits expected their drill instructors to be perfect physical specimens, intimidating figures who could run faster, jump higher, and push harder than anyone else. They didn't expect a woman with a limp. "Look at that," whispered Private Johnson, a cocky 19-year-old from Texas who thought his high school football experience made him tough. "They gave us a broken drill instructor." Private Williams, standing next to him, smirked. "Maybe she got hurt in the chow hall," he muttered under his breath, causing several nearby recruits to stifle laughs. Maria heard every word. She had developed exceptional hearing over the years, a survival skill that had served her. Well, in places where the difference between life and death often came down to catching the sound of a footstep or the click of a weapon being readied. But she said nothing. "Not yet. Attention," bellowed Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez, the senior drill instructor. The recruits snapped to an even more rigid position, if that was possible. "I want you maggots to meet Staff Sergeant Santos. She will be one of your drill instructors for the next 13 weeks. You will show her the same respect you show me, or you will find yourself on the first bus home. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir," the recruits shouted in unison. Rodriguez stepped aside and Maria took center stage. She walked slowly down the line of recruits, her limp more pronounced as she moved across the uneven ground. Behind her back, she could see some of the recruits exchanging glances. A few rolled their eyes. Others looked concerned, as if they were worried about their training being compromised. Private Johnson, emboldened by what he perceived as weakness, decided to test the waters. "Staff Sergeant," he called out, breaking protocol by speaking without permission. "Will you be able to keep up with us during physical training?" The formation fell silent. Even the other drill instructors stopped what they were doing. Speaking out of turn to a drill instructor was a serious breach of military discipline. But Johnson's question carried an extra layer of disrespect that made everyone uncomfortable. Maria stopped walking. She turned slowly to face Johnson, her dark eyes meeting his with an intensity that made him shift uncomfortably. For a moment, the only sound was the distant rumble of aircraft taking off from the nearby airfield. "Private Johnson," Maria said, her voice calm but carrying an edge that made several recruits straighten up even more. "Did I give you permission to speak?" "No, Staff Sergeant, but I didn't ask for an explanation," Maria cut him off. "Drop and give me 50 push-ups now." Johnson hesitated for a split second, clearly debating whether to challenge her authority further. But something in Maria's eyes, a hardness that spoke of experiences far beyond anything he could imagine, made him think better of it. He dropped to the ground and began his push-ups. As Johnson struggled through his punishment, Maria continued her inspection of the recruits. She could feel their eyes on her, judging, questioning, doubting. It was nothing new. She had faced skepticism her entire military career, first as a woman in a male-dominated field, and now as someone whose physical limitations were visible to everyone. But what these recruits didn't know, what they couldn't possibly understand, was that Maria's limp wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a badge of honor earned in the mountains of Afghanistan, where she had made a choice that would haunt and define her for the rest of her life. The memory tried to surface, as it always did when people questioned her abilities. The sound of incoming mortars, the screams of wounded Marines, the impossible decision between her own safety and the lives of her brothers and sisters in arms. But Maria pushed the memory down, locking it away in the same mental vault where she kept all the other ghosts from her 3 combat deployments. "Listen up. Recruits, Maria announced, her voice carrying across the training ground. Over the next 13 weeks, you're going to be pushed harder than you've ever been pushed in your lives. You're going to question whether you have what it takes to earn the title of Marine. Some of you will quit. Some of you will fail. But those of you who make it through will join the finest fighting force the world has ever known. She paused, letting her words sink in. You might look at me and think I'm not qualified to train you. You might think my limp makes me weak. You might think I don't belong here. Her voice grew harder. You would be wrong. Private Williams, emboldened by Johnson's earlier outburst, decided to push his luck. Staff Sergeant, with all due respect, how can you teach us to be warriors if you can't even walk properly? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Several recruits held their breath, waiting to see how Maria would respond. Even Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez watched with interest, curious to see how his newest drill instructor would handle the situation. Maria smiled, but it wasn't a friendly expression. It was the kind of smile that predators wore just before they struck. Private Williams, you seem very concerned about my physical capabilities. Tell me, how many combat deployments have you completed? None, Staff Sergeant, but how many lives have you saved under enemy fire? Williams's confidence began to waver. None, Staff Sergeant. How many times have you had to carry a wounded Marine to safety while taking incoming fire? None, Staff Sergeant. Williams' voice was barely above a whisper now. Then I suggest you keep your mouth shut and your ears open, Maria said, her voice cutting through the morning air like a blade, because you have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. The training ground fell silent again. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. Maria could see the doubt in the recruit's eyes beginning to mix with something else, curiosity perhaps, or the first stirrings of respect. But she knew it wouldn't last. Respect had to be earned, especially from young Marines who thought they knew everything about courage and sacrifice. They would test her again, probably before the day was over. They would push and probe, looking for weaknesses, trying to find reasons to dismiss her authority. They had no idea that Maria Santos had already faced the ultimate test. They had no idea that her limp was the result of a moment when she had chosen the lives of 12 Marines over her own safety. They had no idea that the shrapnel still embedded in her leg was a constant reminder of the day she had proven that true strength had nothing to do with how fast you could run or how high. You could jump, but they would learn. Over the next 13 weeks, Maria would show them what real courage looked like. She would push them beyond their limits, break them down, and build them back up into Marines. And maybe, if they were lucky, they would understand that the strongest people were often those who had been broken and had chosen to keep fighting anyway. As the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, Maria began the first day of training. The recruits had mocked her limp, questioned her abilities, and dismissed her as weak. But they had no idea what was coming. They had no idea that they were about to be trained by a hero whose story would change everything they thought they knew about strength, sacrifice, and what it truly meant to be a Marine. The real test was just beginning. 3 weeks into training, the mockery had only gotten worse. What started as whispered comments had evolved into open defiance, and Maria could feel the situation reaching a dangerous tipping point. Private Johnson had become the unofficial leader of the resistance against her authority. During morning PT, he would deliberately slow his pace when Maria was watching, making exaggerated limping motions that sent ripples of laughter through the formation. When she corrected his form during weapons training, he would nod respectfully to her face, then roll his eyes dramatically once she turned away. But it was Private Williams who pushed things too far. The incident happened during the obstacle course training on a particularly brutal Thursday morning. The recruits were struggling through the rope climb, their hands raw and bleeding from the rough hemp. Maria stood at the base of the obstacle, calling out encouragement and corrections as each recruit attempted the climb. "Keep your legs wrapped tight around the rope, Martinez," she shouted. "Use your legs to push, not just your arms." Private Martinez, a slight young woman from New Mexico, was struggling more than most. Her arms shook with exhaustion as she tried to pull herself up the 30-foot rope. Halfway up, her grip began to slip. "I can't do it, Staff Sergeant," Martinez called down, her voice cracking with frustration and exhaustion. "Yes, you can," Maria replied firmly. "Don't you dare quit on me, Martinez. Find that strength inside you and climb." But Martinez's grip failed completely. She slid down the rope, the friction burning her hands and legs even through her uniform. She hit the ground hard, landing awkwardly on her ankle with a sickening pop that everyone heard. Martinez cried out in pain, clutching her ankle as tears streamed down her face. Without hesitation, Maria dropped to her knees beside the injured recruit, her own damaged leg protesting the sudden movement. "Don't move," Maria instructed, her voice gentle but authoritative. "Let me check that ankle." As Maria carefully examined Martinez's injury, Private Williams saw his opportunity. Maybe if our drill instructor could actually demonstrate the proper technique instead of just standing there watching, Martinez wouldn't have gotten hurt, he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. The other recruits fell silent, shocked by the blatant disrespect. Even Johnson looked uncomfortable with how far Williams had pushed things. Maria's hand stilled on Martinez's ankle. For a moment, the only sound was Martinez's quiet sobbing and the distant noise of other training platoons. When Maria looked up, her eyes held a coldness that made several recruits take an involuntary step backward. "Private Williams," she said, her voice deadly quiet, "are you suggesting that I'm responsible for Private Martinez's injury?" Williams, emboldened by what he mistook for weakness in Maria's gentle treatment of the injured recruit, doubled down. "I'm saying maybe someone who can't even climb a rope herself shouldn't be teaching others how to do it." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez, who had been observing from across the training area, began walking over with quick, angry strides. But Maria held up a hand, stopping him. "Private Williams," Maria said, slowly rising to her feet despite the obvious pain in her leg. "You think I can't climb that rope?" "I think you'd probably fall and hurt yourself worse than you already are," Williams replied, his confidence growing as some of the other recruits snickered. Maria stared at him for a long moment. Then, without warning, she walked to the base of the rope. The recruits watched in stunned silence as she grabbed the thick hemp with both hands. "Rodriguez," she called to the gunnery sergeant. "Time me." "Staff Sergeant, you don't have to," Rodriguez began. But Maria was already starting her climb. What happened next would be talked about in recruit training circles for years to come. Despite her limp, despite the obvious pain in her leg, Maria Santos climbed that rope faster than any recruit had managed all morning. Her technique was flawless, legs wrapped tight, using her core strength to power upward while her arms guided her movement. She reached the top in under 30 seconds, rang the bell with authority, and rappelled down with the grace of someone who had done this thousands of times before. When her feet hit the ground, she wasn't even breathing hard. The training area was completely silent. William's face had gone pale, and even Johnson looked shaken. The other recruits stared at Maria with a mixture of awe and confusion. 32 seconds, Rodriguez announced, his voice carrying a note of pride. "That's faster than the base record for female instructors." Maria walked back to where William stood, her limp seeming less pronounced now, as if the climb had somehow loosened whatever was causing her pain. She stopped directly in front of him, close enough that he could see the small scars on her face that spoke of experiences far beyond anything he could imagine. "Private Williams," she said quietly, "do you have anything else to say about my physical capabilities?" Williams shook his head mutely, unable to meet her eyes. "Good," Maria continued, "because let me tell you something about strength, recruit. Real strength isn't about how fast you can run or how high you can jump. Real strength is about getting back up when life knocks you down. It's about pushing forward when everything in your body is screaming at you to quit. It's about making the hard choices when lives are on the line." She paused, her eyes scanning the entire formation. "Every single one of you is going to face a moment in your military career when you have to choose between what's easy and what's right. When that moment comes, I hope you remember that the strongest people are often the ones who've been broken and chose to keep fighting anyway." The recruit stood transfixed, sensing that there was more to Maria's words than a simple motivational speech. There was something deeper there, something personal and painful that gave weight to every syllable. But before anyone could process what they had just witnessed, the moment was shattered by the arrival of Colonel Harrison, the base commander. His staff car pulled up to the training area with military precision, and he stepped out with the bearing of a man accustomed to absolute authority. "Staff Sergeant Santos," he called out as he approached, "I need to speak with you immediately." Maria's expression didn't change, but several of the more observant recruits noticed her shoulders tense slightly. "Yes, sir." "Rodriguez, take over the training." As Maria limped toward the colonel, the recruits watched with growing curiosity. They had just witnessed something extraordinary. Their supposedly weak drill instructor had just outperformed every one of them on the obstacle course. But now there was something else happening, something that felt important. Colonel Harrison waited until Maria was close enough for a private conversation before speaking. "Santos, I just received a call from the Pentagon. There's a documentary crew coming to the base next week. They're doing a piece on Medal of Honor recipients, and they specifically requested to interview you." Maria's face went completely white. "Sir, I've told you before I don't want any publicity about—" "This isn't a request, Staff Sergeant," Harrison interrupted. "This is coming from the top. The Corps wants to highlight heroes like you, especially female Marines who've shown exceptional courage in combat." The recruits couldn't hear the conversation, but they could see Maria's distress. Whatever the colonel was telling her, it was clearly something she didn't want to hear. "Sir, please," Maria said, her voice barely audible. "My recruits don't know about Afghanistan. I prefer to keep my past separate from my current duties." Harrison's expression softened slightly. "Santos, you can't hide from your service record forever. What you did over there, the Marines you saved, that's not something to be ashamed of." "I'm not ashamed," Maria replied quickly, "but these recruits need to respect me for who I am now, not for what happened 3 years ago. If they find out about the Medal of Honor, everything changes. They'll either put me on a pedestal or they'll think I'm broken goods. Either way, I lose my effectiveness as their instructor." The colonel studied her for a moment. "The interview is scheduled for next Friday." "That's an order, Staff Sergeant." As Harrison walked back to his staff car, Maria stood alone for a moment, her shoulders sagging with the weight of whatever burden she was carrying. The recruits watched her, sensing that something significant had just happened, but unable to understand what. When Maria finally turned back to the formation, her mask was firmly in place again. But Private Martinez, still sitting on the ground with her injured ankle, had been close enough to catch fragments of the conversation. She had heard 2 words that would change everything: Medal of Honor. As the training day continued, Martinez kept the information to herself, but her mind was racing. A Medal of Honor recipient was training them? The Medal of Honor was the highest military decoration, awarded only for acts of valor above and beyond the call of duty. What had Staff Sergeant Santos done to earn such recognition, and why was she so desperate to keep it secret? The answers to those questions would soon rock the entire recruit training company to its core, because in 1 week, when that documentary crew arrived, the truth about Maria Santos would finally come to light. The recruits who had mocked her limp and questioned her strength were about to learn that they had been trained by one of the most decorated female Marines in Corps history. But more than that, they were about to discover the real story behind her limp, a story of sacrifice so profound that it would change how they viewed courage, strength, and what it truly meant to be a Marine. The breaking point was coming, and nothing would ever be the same. Friday morning arrived with an unusual tension in the air. The documentary crew had set up their equipment in the base conference room, their cameras and lights transforming the sterile military space into something that felt more like a television studio. Word had spread quickly through the recruit training company that something big was happening, though most of the recruits still had no idea what it meant. Private Martinez had kept her secret for a full week, but the knowledge was eating at her. Every time she watched the other recruits mock Staff Sergeant Santos, every snide comment about her limp, every eye roll when she gave instructions, it all felt like a betrayal of something sacred that Martinez couldn't quite understand yet. The morning training session was particularly brutal. Maria seemed more intense than usual, pushing the recruits harder, demanding more precision in their movements. It was as if she was trying to cram weeks of lessons into a single morning, knowing that everything was about to change. "Move, move, move," she shouted as the recruits ran through combat drills. "In combat, hesitation gets people killed. When I give you an order, I expect immediate compliance." Private Johnson, still the unofficial leader of the resistance against Maria's authority, was having a particularly bad morning. His rifle kept jamming during the weapons drill, and his frustration was mounting with each malfunction. "This is ridiculous," he muttered to Williams as they cleaned their weapons for the 3rd time. "How are we supposed to learn anything from someone who probably got her limp tripping over her own feet in the motor pool?" Williams laughed, but the sound was forced. Ever since Maria's rope climb demonstration, his confidence in mocking her had been shaken. Still, peer pressure and pride kept him playing along with Johnson's narrative. Maybe she hurt herself opening a can of MREs. Williams replied, though his heart wasn't really in the joke anymore. What they didn't notice was that Private Martinez was close enough to hear every word. Something inside her finally snapped. "You two need to shut your mouths," she said quietly, her voice carrying an intensity that surprised everyone within earshot. Johnson turned to face her, eyebrows raised. "Excuse me, Martinez. Did you just tell me to shut up?" "You heard me," Martinez replied, standing up despite the pain in her still healing ankle. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "Oh, really?" Johnson's voice dripped with sarcasm. "And I suppose you do?" Martinez looked around at the gathering crowd of recruits. She could see Maria in the distance, talking with Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez, unaware of the confrontation brewing among her charges. For a moment, Martinez hesitated. She had promised herself she would keep the secret, but watching these ignorant recruits mock a genuine hero was more than she could bear. "Staff Sergeant Santos is a Medal of Honor recipient," she said quietly. The words hit the group like a physical blow. Several recruits actually took a step backward, as if the information was too big to process. Johnson's face went through a series of expressions: disbelief, confusion, and finally, a dawning horror as the implications sank in. "That's impossible," Williams whispered. "She would have told us. They would have told us." "Why would she tell you?" Martinez shot back. "So you could treat her differently? So you could kiss up to her instead of actually learning to be Marines?" The argument was getting louder, drawing attention from across the training area. Other recruits began gathering around, sensing that something important was happening. "You're lying," Johnson said, but his voice lacked conviction. "There's no way. Dude, the documentary crew is here to interview her," Martinez interrupted. "I heard Colonel Harrison talking to her last week. They're doing a piece on Medal of Honor recipients." The silence that followed was deafening. 80 young recruits stood frozen, their minds racing as they tried to reconcile this new information with everything they thought they knew about their drill instructor. It was Private Chen, a quiet recruit from California who rarely spoke up, who finally voiced what everyone was thinking. "What did she do to earn it?" Martinez shook her head. "I don't know the details, but whatever it was, it's why she limps, and you idiots have been mocking a war hero for 3 weeks." The weight of their behavior began to settle on the recruits like a heavy blanket. Johnson's face had gone pale, and Williams looked like he might be sick. Around them, other recruits were having their own moments of realization, remembering every snide comment, every eye roll, every moment of disrespect they had shown to someone who had clearly earned the right to their absolute respect. But their moment of reckoning was interrupted by the arrival of Maria herself, who had noticed the unusual gathering and come to investigate. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice carrying the authority that came naturally to her. "Why aren't you cleaning your weapons?" The recruits scattered like leaves in the wind, suddenly very interested in their equipment maintenance. But the damage was done. Maria could see it in their faces, the way they couldn't quite meet her eyes, the nervous energy that spoke of secrets shared and boundaries crossed. "Martinez," Maria said quietly, "a word." As the other recruits busied themselves with their weapons, Maria led Martinez a few steps away from the group. Her expression was unreadable, but Martinez could sense the tension radiating from her instructor. "What did you tell them?" Maria asked directly. Martinez's resolve crumbled under Maria's steady gaze. "I'm sorry, Staff Sergeant. I heard you talking with Colonel Harrison last week, and when Johnson and Williams kept making jokes about your limp, I couldn't take it anymore." Maria closed her eyes for a moment, and Martinez could see the pain there. Not physical pain, but something deeper and more complex. "What exactly did you tell them?" Maria asked again. "Just that you're a Medal of Honor recipient," Martinez said quietly, "and that the documentary crew is here for you." Maria was quiet for a long moment, staring out across the training area where her recruits were pretending to work while obviously straining to hear their conversation. "Staff Sergeant," Martinez said hesitantly, "can I ask you something?" Maria nodded. "Why don't you want them to know? I mean, the Medal of Honor. That's the highest honor a soldier can receive. Shouldn't you be proud of it?" Maria's laugh was bitter and hollow. "Pride?" she said quietly. "Martinez, do you know what you have to do to earn a Medal of Honor?" Martinez shook her head. "You have to do something so far above and beyond the call of duty that it defies normal human behavior. You have to risk everything. Your life, your future, your family's peace of mind. For something bigger than yourself. Maria's voice grew quieter. And usually you have to watch good people die while you're doing it. The words hung between them like a confession. Martinez could see tears forming in Maria's eyes, though her instructor was fighting hard to keep them from falling. The Medal of Honor isn't just an award, Martinez. It's a burden. Every day you wake up knowing that people died while you lived. Every day you wonder if you deserve to survive when better Marines didn't make it home. Every day you carry the weight of their sacrifice. Martinez felt her own eyes filling with tears. Staff Sergeant, I'm sorry. I didn't understand. No, you didn't, Maria interrupted, but her voice wasn't angry, and neither do they. That's why I don't talk about Afghanistan. That's why I don't want special treatment or recognition. I just want to do my job and train the next generation of Marines to be better than I was. Before Martinez could respond, Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez appeared at Maria's shoulder. Santos, he said quietly, it's time. The documentary crew is ready for you. Maria straightened her uniform and composed herself with the practiced ease of someone who had learned to compartmentalize pain. Rodriguez, take over the training. I'll be back in an hour. As Maria walked toward the conference room, every recruit in the training area watched her go. The limp that they had mocked for weeks now seemed different somehow. Not a sign of weakness, but a visible reminder of sacrifice they couldn't begin to comprehend. Johnson approached Martinez as Maria disappeared into the building. His usual arrogance was completely gone, replaced by something that looked like shame. Martinez, he said quietly, what have we done? Before she could answer, they heard voices coming from the conference room. The windows were open, and the documentary crew's equipment was powerful enough that fragments of the, interview began drifting across the training area. Can you tell us about the events of March 15th, 2022? Came the interviewer's voice. There was a long pause before Maria's voice responded, and when it came, it was barely above a whisper. We were conducting a patrol in the Kunar province when our convoy was hit by a coordinated ambush. The recruits found themselves drawn toward the building, straining to hear more. They knew they shouldn't be listening, but they couldn't help themselves. They were about to learn the truth about their drill instructor, a truth that would change everything they thought they knew about courage, sacrifice, and what it meant to be a Marine. The real story was finally about to be told. The recruits gathered beneath the conference room windows, their weapons forgotten as Maria's voice drifted out into the morning air. What they heard would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The IED took out our lead vehicle instantly, Maria's voice continued, steady but strained. Sergeant Morrison and Corporal Davis were killed immediately. The rest of us were pinned down in a kill zone with insurgents firing from 3 different positions. The interviewer's voice was gentle but persistent. Staff Sergeant Santos, can you walk us through your actions during the ambush? There was a long pause. Through the window, the recruits could see Maria sitting rigidly in her chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. When she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. We had 12 Marines trapped in that convoy. The insurgents had us surrounded, and they were using mortars to walk their fire closer to our position. I knew we had maybe 10 minutes before they found our range and killed everyone. Private Johnson felt sick to his stomach. For 3 weeks he had mocked this woman, made jokes about her limp, questioned her authority. Now he was learning that she had faced down an entire insurgent force to save the lives of her fellow Marines. What was your tactical assessment of the situation? The interviewer asked. Hopeless, Maria replied without hesitation. We were outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped in the open. The only way out was through a narrow ravine that was completely exposed to enemy fire. Someone had to draw their attention away from the convoy long enough for the others to reach cover. And you volunteered for that mission? Maria's laugh was bitter. There was no mission, no plan, no volunteers. There was just a choice between watching 12 Marines die or doing something about it. The recruits exchanged glances, beginning to understand the magnitude of what they were hearing. This wasn't just a war story. This was the moment that had defined their drill instructor's entire life. Can you describe what happened next? The interviewer pressed gently. Maria was quiet for so long that the recruits thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. I told my team to wait for my signal. Then I broke cover and ran straight at the main insurgent position. I was screaming, firing my weapon, making as much noise as possible. The idea was to draw their fire away from the convoy and give my Marines a chance to escape. That was an incredibly dangerous decision. It was a suicide mission. Maria corrected. I knew I probably wasn't coming back, but 12 lives were worth more than one. Private Williams had tears streaming down his face. He remembered his cruel joke about Maria hurting herself in the chow hall, and the shame was overwhelming. This woman had literally run toward certain death to save her fellow Marines, and he had mocked her for it. The plan worked, Maria continued. The insurgents turned their attention to me, and my team was able to get the wounded Marines to safety. But I was caught in the open with nowhere to go. How long were you under fire? Felt like hours. Probably closer to 20 minutes. I found some cover behind a destroyed wall, but they had me surrounded. That's when the mortars started falling. The interviewer's voice was hushed with respect. Staff Sergeant, the citation for your Medal of Honor mentions that you continued to engage the enemy, even after being wounded. Can you tell us about that? Maria's composure finally cracked. The recruits could hear her crying now, soft sobs that spoke of pain that went far deeper than any physical wound. The first mortar round landed about 10 feet away. She managed. The shrapnel tore up my right leg pretty badly. I couldn't walk, could barely move, but I could still shoot. And you continued fighting? For another hour. I knew that if I stopped, if I let them overrun my position, they'd go after my Marines. So I kept firing, kept drawing their attention even though I was bleeding out and could barely see straight. Private Martinez was sobbing openly now. She thought about all the times Maria had pushed them during training, demanding excellence, refusing to accept excuses. Now she understood. Maria knew what real adversity looked like. She knew what it meant to push through pain and exhaustion because lives depended on it. How were you finally extracted? The interviewer asked. Air support arrived just as I was running out of ammunition. Apache helicopters cleared the area, and a medevac team pulled me out. By then I'd lost so much blood that I was barely conscious. And your Marines? The 12 you saved? Maria's voice grew stronger, filled with pride. All 12 made it home. Every single one of them. Sergeant Williams went on to become a drill instructor himself. Corporal Jackson earned his commission and is now a lieutenant. Private First Class Rodriguez just had his second baby. The recruits listening outside felt the weight of those words. 12 Marines were alive today because of Maria's sacrifice. 12 families had their loved ones home because she had been willing to give her life for theirs. Staff Sergeant Santos, the interviewer said gently, you've been awarded the Medal of Honor, the Purple Heart, and the Bronze Star for your actions that day. How do you feel about being called a hero? The silence stretched so long that the recruits thought the interview might be over. When Maria finally spoke, her words cut through them like a blade. I'm not a hero, she said firmly. Heroes are the Marines who didn't make it home. Heroes are Morrison and Davis, who died in that first explosion. Heroes are the families who lost their sons and daughters in that war. I'm just someone who did what any Marine would do. I took care of my people. But surely you understand that your actions were extraordinary. My actions were necessary, Maria interrupted, and they came with a cost. This limp isn't just from shrapnel. It's a reminder that I survived when better. Marines didn't. Every step I take is a reminder that I have to be worthy of their sacrifice. The interview continued for another few minutes, but the recruits had heard enough. They slowly dispersed, each lost in their own thoughts, trying to process what they had learned. When Maria finally emerged from the conference room an hour later, she found her recruits standing in perfect formation, their weapons cleaned and ready for inspection. But something was different. The usual restlessness was gone, replaced by a respectful attention that hadn't been there before. As she approached the formation, Maria could see the change in their faces. The mockery was gone, replaced by something that looked like awe, but that wasn't what she wanted. She had spent 3 years trying to avoid exactly this reaction. At ease, she commanded, and the recruits relaxed slightly. I assume you heard the interview. No one answered, but she could see the truth in their expressions. Let me be clear about something, Maria continued, her voice carrying across the training area. What you heard in there doesn't change anything. I'm still your drill instructor. You're still recruits who need to earn the title of Marine. The only difference is that now you know why I push you so hard. Private Johnson stepped forward, his face flushed with shame. Staff Sergeant, I owe you an apology, we all do. The things we said, the way we acted. Stop, Maria cut him off. I don't want your apologies. I want your commitment. I want you to understand that being a Marine isn't about being the fastest or the strongest. It's about being willing to sacrifice for something bigger than yourself. She looked each recruit in the eye, her gaze steady and unwavering. Every one of you is going to face a moment when you have to choose between what's easy and what's right. When that moment comes, I want you to remember that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what needs to be done despite that fear. Private Williams raised his hand tentatively. Staff Sergeant, how do we become worthy of the title you're trying to give us? Maria smiled, and for the first time since they had known her, it was a genuine expression of warmth and pride. You start by taking care of each other, she said simply. You watch each other's backs. You never leave a Marine behind. You remember that the Marine next to you is more important than your own comfort, your own safety, your own life. She paused, looking out over the faces of the young men and women who would soon carry on the Corps' legacy. The Marines I saved in Afghanistan weren't heroes because they were perfect. They were heroes because they were willing to die for each other. That's what I want from you, not perfection, but commitment. Not fearlessness, but courage. Not worship, but the understanding that every Marine who came before you paid a price for the title you're trying to earn. As the sun climbed higher in the California sky, the recruits stood in formation with a new understanding of what it meant to be a Marine. They had mocked their instructor's Limp, not knowing it was a badge of honor earned in the crucible of combat. They had questioned her strength, not knowing she had already proven it in the most extreme circumstances imaginable. But more than that, they had learned that true heroism wasn't about individual glory or recognition. It was about sacrifice, commitment, and the willingness to put others before yourself. Over the remaining weeks of training, not a single recruit would question Maria's authority again. They would push themselves harder, support each other more, and graduate as some of the finest Marines the Corps had ever produced. And years later, when they faced their own moments of truth in distant lands and dangerous situations, they would remember the lesson their drill instructor had taught them, that the strongest people are often those who have been broken and chose to keep fighting anyway. The recruits had mocked her Limp, but they had learned that it represented something far more powerful than physical perfection. It represented the price of heroism, the cost of courage, and the true meaning of the Marine Corps motto, Semper Fidelis, always faithful. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos had given them more than military training. She had given them a standard to live up to, a legacy to honor, and an understanding that being a Marine meant being willing to sacrifice everything for the Marines beside you. The mockery had ended. The real training had begun.